Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. A very fascinating episode. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down bit by bit. First and foremost, we have the whole situation with, basically Barry wants to wake Gracie up, because if she's awake, maybe it will quell Orland's anger, and so that's how one way of potentially dealing with the whole cicada situation. So basically they've got this machine, but it's like, oh, you get inside of her head, but by doing so, there might be some bleed over where you get the other person's memory. Obviously, Sherlock is kind of like, oh, Nora and Barry should go. Obviously, he's trying to be sly with everything, but Nora doesn't. She's like, oh, wait, what? She's freaking out because it's like the last thing she wants is Barry to know about, potentially get access to her memories, all the stuff that she's been lying and hiding stuff about. I mean, for one, because Iris was defending her from Sherlock last episode. The whole thing of Iris being like, Nora isn't lying or keeping stuff from us, when in actuality she is, interestingly enough. And that in itself is kind of an interesting thing, because Nora's actually having a hard time with that, because she has to put up this front like everything is okay, like trying to hide the fact that she is hiding a secret, and it's taking its toll on her because she feels like she's hurting her family, especially now, because it's like that secret was one thing, but that was until she found out the past that Eobard and Barry have. That changes that dynamic, and it just keeping that secret, the longer and longer she keeps it, she's worried she's hurting her family. So, but she decides to go inside of Gracie's brain on her own, and it's actually kind of interesting how that ends up playing out, because Gracie, even though she's in a coma, that was all a thing too, is like when you're in a coma like that, you can still potentially hear, and so she's been hearing everything that's going down. She even supports her uncle in what he's doing, because it's and it's understandable. She hates metahumans just as much as he does. He hates metahumans for what happened. They're the reason why what happened to Gracie happened, but for Gracie, it's like metahuman killed her parents. It's like, of course you're going to hate them. And then she gets super pissed the moment she finds out that, wait, you're the Flash's daughter and you hurt my uncle. I will protect him. So in her memories, her defense mechanism is a version of Cicada. Because it's interesting, because for Nora, it's because she went in there, she's like, yeah, things don't, the memory doesn't seem quite right. It ends up being kind of like a modified false memory. And Nora's like, oh, I get it. Okay, so basically she wants to stay in that perfect moment. Even though things weren't perfect, she wants to live in that perfect memory, because she's scared if she goes back, things won't be as good. But even when Nora tries to reach out to her, she's like, no, you're a liar, you're hurt, you're a metahuman, all of you are the same. It's like, geez, it's not just Orland that harbors that hate, so does Gracie. Interestingly enough, she actually has, a shard from the satellite in her head. Now, that's interesting, because we end up finding out some details later on, because of the whole Flash Museum memory. Obviously, I'll dive into that other half of things later, but the thing is, it says that Cicada has killed, up to that point when Nora was a little girl, Cicada had killed 150 people. Obviously all metahumans, but that doesn't change the fact that that's a crap ton of people. And Barry's like, whoa, we never stopped him. I knew that, but we never caught Cicada, but he kept killing. That immediately, and especially what happens later on when Nora realizes, the Cicada, we can see the blonde hair. It isn't Orland, it's Gracie. And I'm like, oh, she grows up to be Cicada. The reason why you never caught Cicada, because there were two different people. She picked up after, whatever happened to Orland, whether he, ultimately ended up dying, maybe, the shard inside of his, the fragment that was, still in his chest or whatever, ended up, potentially finally killing him, or just maybe, whatever the case may be, he's gone in the future, and I think she took over. As we can tell, she hates metahumans just as much, because she says, well, I'll make her pay, and we see, I'm assuming that's supposed to be her as an adult. So what that means for later on in the show or whatever, that's going to be an interesting thing, because obviously Barry's like, oh, I want to cure Cicada. So curing Cicada won't stop this, because obviously Orland will probably still harbor all that hate, maybe, potentially. But then, if Gracie wakes up, it might be a situation of we might be dealing with two Cicadas at once, or maybe it'll be a situation of, Gracie gets weaponized, because she hates, because I think because it's just kind of an interesting thing, which I'm curious, like, is it really going to work like that? Because wouldn't their abilities technically count as like metatech rather than just, them being metahumans? I would feel like, I don't know, like, could you cure tech? Would that even be possible? Because, like, it's all born from the satellite. But I guess, like, it imbues them with power, so they're metahumans on that level, too. But it seems like they're more of a crossbreed between metahumans and metatech, because it was metatech that gave them their abilities, but it's like, it's a part of their body. So that's why I'm like, I don't know if the cure would necessarily work, but maybe it is. Maybe I'm just overthinking that aspect to it. But, yeah, that's such an interesting thing. I think that's the direction they're potentially going to go, where it's like, she took over for her. I mean, like, no one knew who Cicada really was, so mask and everything, like, in her head, Gracie's wearing the same coat and everything, so she probably took over the moniker, which is such an interesting aspect to think about, because it's like, Gracie's kind of like Orland's daughter. She continued down the path her father was on as Cicada, and, Nora's literally doing the same thing as a speedster, trying to be a hero just like her dad, and it's like, the parallels, I think that's kind of interesting. Like, that storyline and the parallels between them is so interesting, because it's like two opposite sides of the same coin in that regard, of like both of them, being kind of a parent kind of being thrust upon them, because obviously Barry and Iris having their daughter come back from the future to be here in the past, but then Orland, his, Gracie kind of getting dropped into his life, kind of changing him. So it's just interesting. We've seen like opposite parallels of just like everything working well for, the West Allens. I mean, obviously there's the issue of like Barry's future and stuff like that, sure, but everything's pretty positive in a sense, whereas everything on the Orland side of things with him and Gracie, things aren't that great. So it's just, obviously, like I said, I keep using the word, but the parallels between it is just kind of fascinating to me. But the other side of things is that Barry and Iris go inside trying to, pull Nora out, but they end up in Nora's memory. Because I was like, whoa. I was like, something's weird going on here, because when they went in, like, there were different people. Like, there was like when they went in, like when Nora went into Gracie's memory, there were like 3 cops, and then it ended up being 4 cops, because one of the cops ended up not being Jones, and the other one ended up being like Singh ended up being one of the cops. There was like, something's different. Oh man, maybe Nora's not with the real Gracie or something. I was like, something crazy's about to happen. It's like, no, I was like, wait, who's that? What? And then it was like, they're in Nora's memories. And I love that Barry's tripping so much. He's like, oh my god, the Flash Museum, this is so cool. They got toys, they got this, it's so crazy. And Iris is like, this is literally going to go to your head. He's like, I think it already has. It's like, I love that he's enjoying it so much. I thought it was kind of pretty neat too. I'm wondering, is that like a real comic book, or is that something like a cover that they made specifically for the show? Because there's one where Barry's kind of, the Flash is kind of strapped down to a table, and you have Cicada over him with a knife. I'm like, huh. I wonder, is that like a legit, like, actual comic book? There was actually another one below it. I think I was pausing it, and I caught a glimpse of it. I think it said Grodd is back. So I was like, oh, that's kind of neat. So I also love Barry being like, really? My villains get their own separate wing too? So I thought that was kind of neat. The ones I saw was the Thinker, Dr. Light, and Trickster. So that was kind of interesting. But then, like, obviously it also, Iris and Barry end up seeing, like, one of Nora's memories of, Iris kind of yelling at her. The toy ended up breaking. Just, come on, I'm a reporter. Did you not think I'd find you? It's kind of interesting, because I was wondering about this, because obviously Iris wanted to, be a reporter and everything, like, expand what she's already doing, like, expand her blog, kind of turn it more into, a business with other people and stuff. And, like, I was like, at first she was all psyched about it, but then she was hesitant later on. I was like, why is that? Like, what? Like, but then because she found out the only name that was available was Central City Citizen, and she was like, why she was so against everything, because she was like all for it, but then like Barry's like, oh, that's, and then she's like, I maybe it's not a good day. It's like, because it's like, we've literally read that post, that news paper for the past 4 years, and in it, that was the name of, the magazine, that's the newspaper she had created. And it's like, that's what this is about for her. It's like, she thought like, okay, maybe hopefully things had changed. maybe we're progressing towards changing things, but it's like for that, you know, it almost feels like fate and destiny. Just like things are just set in stone because it's like everything's still leading us down to that path. Interestingly enough, and Iris brought up an interesting thing too, because it's like the fact of the matter is, look at Nora's memories. They haven't changed. Like even with what we're doing, even though Nora came back in time, her memories are still the same. So it's like kind of proof in, you know, Iris's mind that maybe things haven't changed, that things are still going to end up the way that they end up, you know, because she's blaming herself. She's like, oh, you know, kind of, because for her it's like she's seeing the mother she'll become, and it scares her because, you know, that's always been her fear of, like, you know, it's like, am I really as bad as Nora thinks I am? But then, and it became such a fascinating thing where Barry kind of realizes, like, no, that's the false memory. This is coming from the perspective of a little girl who was angry, and it warped her perspective. And like, it's so interesting. Like, that's not how the memory went down at all. Like, Iris was very actually nice and compassionate. But then Iris is like, well, maybe it kind of stemmed from somewhere real later on. But it's like, no, like, even Nora admits it. It's like, no, like, I was angry, like, you know, angry at not having a dad. And the fact of the matter is, you know, I was always angry. And you, because you were here, you ended up getting the brunt of my anger. So it's like, she, you know, once again, like, looking back, she had such issues with Iris. Like, obviously, you know, what probably like perpetuated it and made it worse was finding out that Iris took her abilities. But like, I figured as much, and Nora ends up figuring out, it's like, Iris did it to protect her. I mean, to be fair, Iris having, you know, Barry being the Flash is probably the scariest thing for Iris, because it's like she keeps herself very calm, cool, and collected, you know. But obviously, like, even this season we saw, like, when she thought something had Barry, she was like, you could saw her kind of like tearing up and almost like almost you could tell her like she was trying to breathe because it scares her, like, you know, because she can't stop him from being a Flash. Obviously, that was something that, you know, Nora was trying to potentially get him to do. But it was like, she knows, like, the city needs him, you know, the hero he does, like, all the good work he does as a hero. Like, you know, it's that whole thing of, like, can you be selfish when it comes to a hero, you know, when you're scared for their safety, but they're saving other people. So it's that complicated situation of, like, should your selfishness of wanting to protect and keep safe the person you love outweigh, like, all the good they do as a superhero, essentially? I think that's such an interesting aspect to it. And so for her, it's like, she goes, no, I understand why Barry's got to do this. And so she did not want Nora to go down that path too, because it's like Barry disappeared, and, like, you know, that was probably the most heartbreaking moment in her life. And it's just like, I can't handle losing another person I love. And so that's why she took Nora's abilities. And it's like, I figured that would be the reason, because even Barry was like supporting her, because he was like, I know who you are, Iris. The fact of the matter is, you never do that to be malicious. And it's like, once again, it was just because of Nora's, you know, she was a little girl. So I mean, obviously she was older when she found out her abilities and everything, but because she was so angry as a little girl, she just used that. She didn't understand her mom's perspective, but now she does. It's like, you were trying to protect me. You didn't want me to disappear like that, because, you know, if I had my powers, I'd become a hero like him, and maybe what happened to him would eventually happen to me. And, you know, Iris was trying to protect her in her own way. And I thought that was so good. I love how they, like, tied that all together like that. And I figured as much. It's like, because I like that, you know, that it's like, oh, like, Nora made it seem like Iris was some monster. And it's like, no, it was just the, you know, a little girl who missed her dad, didn't get to know her dad. Because I was about to say, I was like, oh man, that's so messed up, Iris. Because even with, you know, Nora's warped memory, even I was still kind of like, yeah, but I'm sure Iris, even if she's kind of mean like that, the fact of the matter is, the only reason why she's like that is because she's sad too. Because even, you know, Nora's like, yeah, like, it wasn't just me who lost Barry. Like, you know, Iris lost Barry too, and that's got to be hard, losing a person you love like that, you know? Not knowing what happened either. That just makes it 10 times worse, I'm sure. It's even interesting what Sherlock does when he goes, wait, the reason why Nora went by herself is because she didn't want you to see her memories. She's keeping a secret. And it's like, and Nora's like, and then, like, everyone's like, what's secret? And then he messes with her by being like, the memories she has about her mom. Isn't that right, Nora? And kind of gave her it out. And she's like, right. I'm like, oh, dude, Sherlock, you're so mean. You were pushing her buttons like that to see, probably, I guess, see if she was going to crack. I was like, is she about to break the secret? And it's like, no, she didn't. it's actually kind of interesting because I didn't talk about it, but in Nora's memories, her defense mechanism, amongst anything and anybody, her defense mechanism was reverse flash, which is so fascinating. Once again, the kind of parallels between her and Gracie in that regard. Kind of being protected by a villain to a certain extent. Obviously, like I said earlier, with Gracie's situation being a little bit different. But even like Sherlock finding that out because Barry told him, and it's like, huh, that's fascinating. Because it's like, she could have used anything. Like, it literally, the memory in particular was of the Flash Museum. She could have used anything. The fact that she used Reverse Flash's suit speaks volumes. And because the fact of the matter is, I guess he was more of a father figure for her, sadly, than Barry was. Because he wasn't, Barry wasn't around. But Reverse Flash was. He taught her everything she knows. And I think even so, this experience taught like Nora, like she realizes like, Gracie's willing to do whatever it takes to protect her uncle, and it made her realize like, I'm willing to do the same, whatever it is to protect my family, even if it means I have to lie to them. I understand why I'm doing it, because everything I'm doing, is for the people I love. She understand what she's fighting for. It kind of reignited that flame. So even if she has to lie, she'll continue to do so. But now Sherlock is probably on the way to figuring things out. I wonder how much does he know about Reverse Flash in this timeline? I mean, not this timeline, on in this Earth, because about the fact is that Eobard has his face, on this Earth and everything like that. What's also fascinating too is they are slowly changing things, because the Central City Citizen was started in 2021, but now Iris is starting it in 2019. It's like, man, it's crazy to me, because it's like, when you actually think about it, this timeline is super messed up. It's nothing like what it was supposed to be, because once again, it's like Barry, once again, this all started, even with just the Flashpoint situation, it's even more altered, because let's not forget, like, Barry ended up getting his powers, like, when it, I'm blanking, I could be wrong about this, but it was like 6 years early. Like, he got them in 2014. He wasn't supposed to get them until 2020, until, Eobard intervened and made him get them on 6 years early like that. So it's just kind of interesting that as the series progresses, this timeline is changing more and more. In a lot of cases, for the better, it's just kind of interesting to think, like, oh yeah, like, from the very get-go, from the beginning of this series, his timeline has always been warped. And it makes you wonder, will it ever go back to what it was supposed to be? That might be kind of how they end up planning this whole thing out. Maybe not. Maybe this timeline will always stay the way it is. I mean, I'm sure with everything involved in this whole Arrowverse situation, that'd be like a very complicated thing. But nevertheless, that was all kind of very interesting. There's also another side note to this episode too, and that was the situation with Cisco, that Ralph was like, oh yeah, like, there's a lead to Cicada, but it turned out that Cicada was a metal bin. And it's like, you said he was hurting people. It's like, yeah, every day with that god-awful music of his that he's subjecting people to. I thought that was kind of interesting. But then, like, the moment it gets revealed, Cisco's like, it's singles night at this place and everything. I'd assumed, like, because he was like, oh, you're trying, he's like, I thought you grew up, and now I see that, you're just caught up in your own stuff, you're selfish. But it's like, he's like, it's not like that. Part of me was like, oh, it didn't end up being this, but I thought Ralph was trying to be Cisco's wingman. I thought, it's like, oh, yeah, the whole, you and Cynthia, Gypsy, that whole situation. And I was like, oh, trying to help Cisco get back out there, which I guess arguably it could be that too, because before becoming elongated, man, Ralph could do whatever he want, but he was alone. He didn't have any friends. Now he does, and it's like, hey, we have a day off from this whole cicada hunting thing. It's like, I want us to, to go out and have fun, because for him, it's like his one of the guys that his dad dated, Doug, the Zamboni driver. The whole thing about how if you wait to live your life, you'll end up dying before that happens, because it's like, you'll always be waiting for the next thing if you don't live your life now. It's like, there's always going to be another cicada. There's always going to be another thing to focus on, like a cure for medicine and stuff like that. There's always going to be something. So, you need to live your life while you have the chance. And it seems like might be taking steps in that direction inadvertently, because he ended up meeting Camilla. And they kind of hit it off immediately. So that's nice. So I guess, because you see Ralph kind of smiling like, hey, at the very least, I think it kind of worked out in the end. But like I said, I thought it was more so going to be like Ralph was going to be his wingman type of situation. But I guess arguably it kind of works out like that. But that wasn't like Ralph's main intention, I think, So I thought that was pretty interesting. It's kind of interesting learning about Ralph. Like the fact of the matter is he grew up on the ice because his mom dated a Zamboni driver. And then like you had Sherlock being like, oh yeah, like that whole situation of like, there are no Zambonis on his Earth, and you kind of have to clear the ice yourself. But it kind of was well worth it and stuff like that. I also love kind of adorableness that is like Nora struggling to ice skate and stuff. I think as a speedster, that probably has to be a little humiliating to a certain extent, because like you're so used to running so fast, and it's just like this is an element that's not really yours like that. I just thought that was kind of cute. Iris being by her side during the whole thing, and it's just kind of like, it's this like cute family moment, I thought it was kind of pretty neat. So, but like I said, very fascinating episode. Like I also brought up earlier, I don't think the cure is going to work the way they think it will. Maybe it potentially will, but I don't think everything's going to be as okay as everyone thinks it potentially is, even with things going down like that. But ultimately, we'll have to wait and see where all of this takes us, as Nora, once again makes it clear she's willing to do whatever it takes to protect her family, and I'm curious to see just how far she is willing to go in that regard. Also, the continuation of this Gracie situation, especially this development, what's going to happen when she does eventually wake up, What are my thoughts about her potentially taking over the role of Cicada at some point in time in the future? True, or, what does that mean for her now? I'm so curious to see how this all plays out. I'm very interested to see what the next episode has in store for us. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.